Hello, everybody, to the class of CIS 3350. My name is Hytham, and I'm joined by my colleagues Nick, Eugene, Wesley, and Bryce. And today we're going to be talking about spatial social economic inequality in the Los Angeles area. So before we get into it, let's talk about a little context and a little background on our project. Let's talk about a little bit about inequality and specifically spatial inequality around Los Angeles. We know that rising inequality is something that can be avoided by addressing and understanding the causes of it. This project will try to see what the biggest factors are in regarding inequality and hopefully find ways to ensure a balancing among social, economic, and environmental dimensions of sustainable development.
This section will cover the background on similar research and explanation of our area of interest. Our project's area of interest is mainly the Los Angeles city in California within the central LA region. However, we do look into the surrounding regions such as the South and West Side and also the San Fernando Valley. The reason why we chose this area is due to several factors. And one of these factors being that Los Angeles is one of the most populated areas in the United States. It currently holds a population of over 10 million. This can offer a sufficient sample size when conducting our research. Another reason why is due to the amount of diversity inside of the city. A study has found that about 73% of citizens are minorities, races other than white, and this is important because studies have shown that there is a correlation between minority-based communities and lower income levels, according to the Economic Policy Institute. Additionally, we chose this area due to the variety of unemployment levels per city in the LA County. For instance, Compton and Willowbrook has an unemployment rate of about 15%, and Beverly Hills has an unemployment rate of about 4.7%. With these large differences, it can be intriguing to know what factors are causing this. And ultimately, based off all of these points, we thought it would be interesting to find potential factors that are contributing to income disparities in Los Angeles.
Now that we know a little bit about the area that this project will be focusing on, let me talk to you a little bit about the problem statement and the research question that this project is focusing on. For one, the problem statement: what factors drove spatial social economic inequality in the greater Los Angeles area? We'll be doing this by observing how race, income levels, education levels, population density, crime, and ethnicities, and how they affected inequality. We'll also observe how the areas of inequality compare to those without and see how those metrics affect inequality levels. Now let's take a little bit of time to talk about the spatial data sources that we use and the preparation details that entailed with it.
So next we have spatial data source and preparation details. So the first task for the team when it came to setting up the model we wanted to work with was finding good, reliable data. And we decided to split this task into two phases. So in phase one, the team used ArcGIS's online library and Living Atlas to find various data sets. And then in order to make sure each of these data sets we were looking for were reliable, the team used the authoritative filter to make it so that only the official data sets from Esri would show up. And so phase two of this process was all about sorting and preparing the data. So once we selected the handful of data sets, the team discussed which ones would be the most beneficial to our model in order to refine our choices. And then once the best data sets were selected, the team went into ArcGIS Pro to explore each of the options that came with each data set. And so once this process was finished, we ended up with around 7 different map layers to explore. And these variables were housing cost, education levels, race, unemployment rates, population density, poverty status, and median household income as the base layer.
Methodology flowchart. Our project really started out by defining our research questions for determining spatial inequality in United States neighborhoods. We focused on understanding factors that drove the social economic inequality within the greater Los Angeles area, such as race, income levels, and education. After procuring online data layers, the group proceeded to create products and to make sure that the created maps are able to communicate the information accurately and effectively. Distribution of the data was done by publishing the data onto the ArcGIS website.
The spatial analysis method we chose to mainly use is clustering. This method is used to find natural patterns and hotspots of correlating data. This method is represented by symbols that are proportionately sized to the number of characteristics in each cluster. We decided to use this method because we wanted to visually show the differences and similarities between the factors that lead to poverty or spatial inequality. For example, the images shown on this slide include maps we've built with a factor changed into dots as symbols or map features to show natural patterns, hotspots, cold spots, and even outliers that correlate with the different color shaded areas. With this method, we were best able to show the comparison side by side between the factors we wanted.
Okay, so now we're going to take a couple of minutes to talk about the results from our project, and we're going to go over each factor and how it affected the findings that we were looking for.
The first factors of spatial inequality we decided to compare were unemployment and poverty. By looking at the legend on the bottom left of the corner, you can understand a bit more of the map. By building this map and layering the poverty spatial data on top of the unemployment rate data, we were able to see hotspots from clustering of blue dots that correlate with the orange and dark orange shaded areas of the map. This supports that unemployment and poverty have a correspondent relationship. Unemployment is a contributing factor to poverty. Areas with a higher unemployment rate equals a higher loss of income, therefore a higher rate of poverty. However, poverty also contributes back to unemployment. For example, it becomes more difficult to travel, to interviews, pay for childcare, or care for one's health, making a job hunt all the harder. We also note that there is a significant difference of coastal counties and inner city areas. This is shown within all of our factors. However, this is another insight that can be explained in the next slide of comparing population density levels.
All right, so next we have population density versus poverty. And so when looking at the population density map, the dark red indicates higher levels of density while the lighter colors indicate areas that are less dense. And this can also be said for the poverty map, where the darker colors indicate areas where poverty is more prevalent. So the darker purple on this map indicates areas where 25% or more of the income is below poverty levels. And it can be deduced that both population density and poverty levels are highly correlated. The clustering of data in both these maps show that high levels of poverty are found in high density areas such as South LA and adjacent areas. Areas with high correlation clusters also include Hollywood, Boyle Heights, and Northeast LA. And another interesting aspect that was observed was that more affluent neighborhoods, such as those along the coastline, have lowest levels of poverty and population density. And this just further goes to show how correlated these two variables are when it comes to spatial inequality in LA.
Education and poverty. The data depicts areas where those who achieved an education level that was less than the ninth grade generally lived in areas with a higher concentration of residents that lived below the poverty level. An example of this would be Huntington Park, Census Tract 0603753226.06, or about 25.3% of the residents lived under the poverty level, with 39.8% of the population having an education hovering around or less than ninth grade and a high school diploma. There are areas, however, that goes against this notion too, but not to the same degree. Irvine is an example of this, in which there are people with bachelor's degrees and graduate/professional degrees living in areas of high poverty, with surrounding areas contrasted with areas of relatively little poverty with similar degree levels, such as Lake Forest and Chino Hills.
Here, let's take a look at how crime statistics affect poverty. We are using a USA Crime Index layer provided by Esri that compiles data from the 2021 calendar year. The index values for the US level are 100, representing the average crime of that year. A value more than 100 represents a higher crime than the national average, and a value of less than 100 represents lower crime than the national average. So in this layer, anything that is darker than this particular hue is representative of higher than the national average. Some areas of focus that we can take a look at in this layer is the inner city neighborhoods that include downtown Los Angeles, East LA, and even here in Inglewood. If we take a look back at downtown LA, in comparison to the national average of 100, the overall crime index in this area is a staggering 322, being over actually 3 times the national average. Here in East LA, we see 446, and over here in Inglewood, we see an even larger number, 546 level. Once we compare these areas to the poverty level, we see a correlation in poverty. In the same area, downtown LA sees 34.8% of its population below the federal poverty line, and in East LA, it's actually 14.9. We actually don't have data for Inglewood for this statistic, and sometimes happens in real world analysis. Sometimes data scientists don't have, or they don't have the data that they need for the analysis, and they had to have ways so they can handle missing data.
This section will cover the correlation between ethnicity and poverty. For this section, we looked into 2 different regions within the LA County. The left map shows the central region, and the right map shows the San Fernando Valley. In the first map on the left, we found several things. First, being that Hispanics and Latinos held the majority of the population in LA. Second is that the highest poverty rated clusters are in the inner city of LA within central LA, in comparison to its surrounding areas. With this, we found that Hispanics and Latinos were the main race within those clusters. This can mean that Hispanics and Latinos have a strong correlation between poverty. In the second map on the right, we found the San Fernando Valley, which is a little more north than the main city. This region had significantly less poverty levels. However, we did find that the main cluster of high poverty rated areas were still Hispanics and Latinos. This can further suggest that Hispanics and Latinos are having a strong correlation between poverty. And lastly, we found that the white ethnicity populated the majority of areas with the lowest poverty rated rates throughout the LA County.
We hope that this project was not only enjoyable to listen and look at our presentation, but we hope that you also gained some key insights the same way that we saw. We want you to take away the key factors that contribute to spatial social economic equality and start thinking about how you guys can now take this knowledge and see how we can affect the society as a whole. Like we mentioned in our report, one way is that we can enforce lawmakers to start making policies that help address these problems.